cards on the table, right? I love Star Trek. Star Trek playing cards. It's a wee joke.
You don't sound very optimistic. Scotty, beat me up.
Back in the day, the only way you could watch Star Trek when it wasn't currently on was via VHS. And VHS was so expensive and bulky that it was very rare to have home video access to an entire season of television, let alone an entire series. The cost was so prohibitive that you'd usually have just a few standout episodes on tape, if anything. Stuff like the home video release of seminal Next Generation two-parter, The Best of Both Worlds, a double bill telemovie that spanned a long and arduous gap between the show's third and fourth seasons, and one of the most excruciating cliffhangers in the franchise's entire history. The point is that it was really difficult back in the day to be a Star Trek fan, or indeed a fan of any TV show. It wasn't like today where we have infinite television on tap at all times and a constant source of news about on-set politics, the next season rumour mill, and showrunners doing a never-ending podcast tour to keep their show in the dirt sheets. Buying bits of your favourite show on VHS was such a sacred thing because you would end up paying £20 to £25 just to have 3 or 4 episodes that you could watch whenever you wanted. It was special. It was an occasion and such an event that you wouldn't even fast forward all the trailers at the start of the tape. You'd sit there eagerly watching all of Paramount's promos for the upcoming Star Trek stuff, all lavishly produced with these beautiful, evocative voiceovers that would sell you on the dream that is Star Trek.
Dream that became a reality and spread throughout the stars.
And there was one promo in particular for not a new VHS or a new upcoming series, but something that felt desperately out of reach, especially for a child growing up in the middle of Scotland. And that was the fabled Star Trek experience at the Las Vegas Hilton.
The 24th century is coming to the Las Vegas Hilton. Star Trek, the experience.
This was the ultimate Star Trek experience, the grand church, the nerd mecca. It certainly seemed that way from the promos. You'd get beamed onto a Galaxy-class ship and you'd take a station on the bridge and Riker would phone you and tell you that the Klingons are kicking off about something or other.
I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. If you just be patient, we'll explain everything.
You'd be immersed in a bespoke, interactive Star Trek episode that you couldn't experience anywhere else. An entire piece of the Star Trek universe, tailor-made for a privileged few who could get themselves to Nevada. And then it wasn't even over. You'd go and relax in a big futuristic bar where a Ferengi would serve you a Tarkalian tea and your dad could get a synth ale, which was probably just a pint of Budweiser in an impractically shaped glass. Unfortunately, my parents loved me, so they never took me to Las Vegas. And the Star Trek experience eventually shut up shop in 2008. Thanks, Obama. So it's always been this unobtainable thing in my life, locked away by an ocean of time now as well as an ocean of ocean. But the dream remains, and the algorithms all seem to know it, because for months before I ever got the chance to go to Bridge Command in Vauxhall, I was getting these ads in my various feeds, and oh, it seemed great. Slipping on a daft-looking jumpsuit and giving it "she can't take anymore, Captain." Oh. Now, Ubisoft's Star Trek Bridge Crew was a great laugh, but Bridge Command is real, with tactile buttons, blinking computer panels, and an engineering bay full of power cores that you physically thunk in and out of the power chain as the various energy requirements of the mission start getting ever more demanding. I never entertained actually going, of course, because the thought of a bunch of awkward nerds turning up to some underpass in South London and pretending to be in Starfleet together just seemed like an unlikely thing to ever work. Bridge Command is surely targeting a demographic most notable for social awkwardness, thought I, and that kind of put me off the idea completely. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit there, but yes, I wanted to be the ship's engineer if I was going to go at all. You see, for a mainstream thing, Star Trek has a very weird hook in that the reason why it's entertaining, the reason why it's so eminently watchable, is that it's essentially about a group of very competent people doing their jobs really well, solving problems through ingenuity, empathy, technical expertise, diplomacy, just the good brain activity of enlightened 24th century humans. People who come from a utopia where being smart is considered a virtue and not something regarded with conspiratorial suspicion, as it is today. And also, and this is really significant, nobody has to cook, because you can just go up to a hole in the wall and say, "Geez a curry." and it'll just generate a curry for you out of thin air. You don't have to do anything. All that time saved. The people in Star Trek, they don't have to spend their entire existence figuring out how to put calories into their body so they can stay alive. And all that time saved cooking, doing the dishes and boiling the kettle and all that stuff just gets ploughed into other things like cognitive self-improvement and learning the trombone. As a model for society, it's aspirational, and it means that one can be a hero without having to be the hero, making something like Bridge Command an inviting prospect for someone who doesn't have the charisma or desire to take on the burdens of command. Everyone's contribution is valid. There are no sitting around jobs on a starship, because if just one person fails to perform their role, you end up with 3% hull going into the final battle. Like what happened to us because I forgot to send power to the shields. It was my first day. I was lucky enough to attend a Bridge Command session with Eurogamer editor Tom Phillips, who has done his own write-up on the site. He did communications, so he was effectively our ship's Uhura. So his perspective is a lot different from mine, but he was doing really pivotal stuff like coordinating relief efforts with other starship captains, and you would see people come up on his screen in full costume, actors who were there playing support roles in our adventure. He would also maintain comm links with enemy ships, respond to their taunts, and even, via a very sort of Minesweeper-esque minigame, hack their ships to remotely lower their shields and shut their weapons down and things like that. Similarly, in support of the mission, it was my job to make sure all the systems had enough energy from the reactor to do their job. Everything on the ship requires power, obviously, but not every system has to be running at full pelt all the time, and so the engineering role is a bit of a plate spinning operation where you have to constantly juggle the reactor's limited output, routing it to the systems that need it in the moment and away from the systems that don't, complicating things, systems that require a lot of energy, output a lot of heat, and so there was a limited supply of coolant that needed to be shunted around the system as and when. And so I was getting into a rhythm with that, listening out for other people announcing their next moves, the orders that were being given by the captain, who was bald by the way, which added a lot of authenticity to the experience, constantly trying to ascertain and preempt the energy needs of the other crew stations as they did the exciting work of killing pirates. So in a very Eurogamer fashion, we were performing roles on the ship that were more scientific, more technical, more cerebral than the outwardly heroic stuff of making command decisions, flying the ship, and shooting the guns. But our experience was no less exciting, no less thrilling. The rhythm section, after all, is no less important than the front man. I'm gonna take this stupid badge off. After a while, the experience had become so immersive and the stakes so real that I was swearing at the warp core like a proper engineer, thumping my fist on the control panel, and genuinely wanting to do a good job for the sake of my crew, not wanting to be the reason that we would have to bundle ourselves into the escape shuttle or set the self-destruct off, which thankfully didn't happen on my watch, but is always a lingering possibility within the fiction of the game. They're the first things you get shown when you board the ship. Here's how you set the self-destruct off, here's the escape shuttle. Try not to use them. And I think that is my big takeaway from the experience, really. That I went into this not actually expecting to get into it. I expected to feel a little bit silly and a little bit awkward, but the game is cleverly designed to make those feelings melt away as quickly as possible. Initially, you're fumbling to get into an Enterprise-era jumpsuit and you feel a bit of a prat. And then everyone around you is pretending that they're in a space military, and that's a little bit of a lane change because 5 minutes earlier you were just a guy walking past Vauxhall tube station trying to avoid stepping in puddles of vomit like everyone else in South London. Then all of a sudden you're in a weird sort of Star Trek / Starship Troopers type environment, and there's a fake futuristic galactic news broadcast on a TV in the waiting room, which seems to be a vague riff on GB News, betraying that this is actually quite distinct from the 24th century utopia that Star Trek is going for. And then you're funneled into a large transporter room, actually an elevator, told that you're being molecularly deconstructed with haptic whooshing and a mesmerizing light show to match, and deposited in, you're told, the mess hall of a big military spaceship, where you can have a Coke Zero served to you in a futuristic metal flask, which you have to give back, unfortunately. And this transporter sequence, this very sort of obvious light show with its piped in sound effects and exaggerated rumbling, is in fact the real big genius moment of the whole thing. It's a threshold, a physical and metaphorical barrier between the dreary life you've left on Earth and the fictional world of the game. It serves a similar function to a TV show's intro sequence. It sets your expectations. It gets you ready to be willingly immersed in this alternative reality that has its own rules, its own moral assumptions, its own politics of body and state. And once you've gone through this intro sequence, you are ready, you are invested, you're all in. And it creates a slight amount of peer pressure as well, encouraging everyone to get with the program and roleplay, which is how, to answer my earlier question, it solves the problem that everyone invested in Bridge Command is going to be a weird, awkward nerd. Once you get dematerialized by a transporter beam, you're no longer a weird, awkward nerd, you're joining Starfleet. You're one small cog in a big military machine, and it feels good. We were clapping and hooting like Americans, which was mad because we're just a bunch of guys from London and thereabouts. But all that oppressive stiffness that comes with being British, and also millennial, let's face it, completely left us, along with any sense of awkwardness or silliness that we might have felt going in. It was a genuinely wonderful feeling, and one that I didn't expect to experience alongside a bunch of strangers and a friend who has never seen me so much as raise my voice in public before. Bridge Command is a love letter to the popular sci-fi of the 90s and early 2000s, the stuff that Tom and I grew up with, and the software that runs the whole thing really locks in that this is a 90s throwback because those 3D graphics look like they're running on a Voodoo 2. There's a big Star Trek influence here, which you're clearly supposed to be mindful of, even though they can't freely admit it for reasons that should be obvious. But also in the graphic and set design, there's more than a little Battlestar Galactica. In the world building, there are echoes of Starship Troopers and Wing Commander, and unlike Chris Roberts' own efforts to do a modern version of that, Bridge Command is an actual thing that you can fully experience right now. And it probably hasn't burnt through as much investor cash either. Speaking of which, it's fairly modestly priced for what it is. A couple of hours of total immersion not Trek with live sets and live actors and everything for around £50 depending on when in the week you go. Your progress and rank are saved on a database, and so you can, if you have the time and money, build a character and play them over a whole succession of story missions, which is a lovely touch and will surely encourage plenty of return visits, which is obviously the point. The question here is it better than Star Trek Bridge Crew?
Sean, can you shoot that Klingon?
I'm sending you. Absolutely can.
Well, no, because it obviously doesn't have the license that it desperately wants to evoke, and you can't play it in your living room. But also yes, because it's a total immersion theatre experience in a physical space, and you're frankly more likely to be able to get a full squad together for it. If you're a sado like me, and if South London is accessible to you, I think it's honestly a no-brainer to experience at least once. And it has 100% scratched any lingering itch I might have had to go and visit Las Vegas in 1998, which I think that's something to be celebrated.